Good evening. I sure hope you can hear me. Um, Let me try to mess around with this mic a little bit. Can you hear me? All right. So I'm on here tonight just to do a little bit of Bible study tonight in Genesis chapter 1. Just Genesis chapter 1. I was reading this and I came across some really, really interesting things. So I thought maybe you might want to know too. So yeah, I don't have any, I didn't plan out my whole my live tonight, so sorry. But let's talk about Genesis chapter 1. I wanted to point out a couple of things. Now, I missed it. Maybe you got it, but I missed it. So, in Genesis chapter 1, in the very beginning, when everything begins, we find that God is like creating the earth and all that, right? Right? He's creating the earth. But what I found was interesting is he creates a few other things that we don't really I've never heard. I've never heard this written this way. So I'm reading Genesis chapter 1 verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void. Now, if the earth was without form, doesn't that mean that the earth actually didn't exist? So he's creating the earth right then and there. Okay? The earth was without form and void. Didn't have any form. It was nothing, right? And the darkness was upon the face of the deep. So darkness was just, right? Just darkness. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. So it seems like there was water already. He didn't create water there. It was water existed. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. Now we're up to verse 5. So now we have a division, light and dark. First, there was just darkness, and he had to create the light in order to have a separation between the two. Okay? He created the light. Verse 5. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. Now, these are the names that he gave to light and dark, day and night. It says it right here. And he called the light day and the darkness night. Now, this is what he named it. And the evening and the morning were the first day. Now, the first day begins with an evening and then a morning. But how do we calculate days? Morning, evening, and then next morning is a whole day, right? But here, the evening is actually the beginning of a day. I think you're over here, so I'll look over here. So the evening is actually the beginning of a day. All right? This is why in a Jewish tradition, you'll find that they celebrate their Sabbath beginning on Friday night. They don't start it on Saturday. They start it on Friday night because when the sun goes down, it becomes evening and it is actually the next day. Okay. Verse 6. And God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters." So there's a firmament in the middle of the water. What is a firmament? Let's look up what a firmament is, just so we know for clarity here. And this is how I study, right? If there's any words that I don't understand, I want to be really particular and clear about, I look up the word. I look them up in the dictionary, and I will also look them up in, I have a Strong's Concordance or even a Vines right? I look them up in concordances. Like, what did the Bible say about this? The dictionary, Oxford Dictionary version of what a firmament is, the heavens or the sky. So heavens and sky are being used synonymously here as if they are the same. The heavens or the sky. That means when I look in the sky, I'm looking up into the heavens. Now we all look up and up there, but this is talking about the heavens actually being the sky. Heavens or sky. Okay? All right. So, going back to verse 7. And God made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament, and it was so. So now we've got waters on earth and waters in heaven, okay? Because the firmament is heaven. This is the division, the sky, okay? Heaven. The firmament divides the water below and the water above. And so he's creating two things at the same time. And God called the firmament heaven. So we looked it up, but it's right here. And God called the firmament heaven. And the evening and the morning were the second day. And God said, let the waters under the heaven be gathered together in one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. And God called the dry land earth. Now, we understand that he's creating earth here on the third day. So prior to the third day, there was no earth, because we remember in the beginning, the earth was formless and without void. It didn't exist. Formless. It had no form. It wasn't there. It didn't exist. So he actually creates earth, the dry land, earth, on the third day. And the gathering together of the waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good. And God said, let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed is in itself, upon the earth. And it was so. You notice human beings, males, they have a seed within themselves, and they have the ability to cause reproduction, put it that way. He did the same thing with us as he did with the trees having the fruit within itself to be able to reproduce. Verse 12, and the earth brought forth grass and herb yielding seed after his kind, and the tree yielding fruit whose seed was in itself after his kind, and God saw that it was good. 13, and the evening and the morning were the third day. And God said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night. Okay, here we go. Let there be lights in the firmament of heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and for years. So these lights in heaven, in the firmament of the heaven. So if the firmament was heaven, and he said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven, this here is telling me that this is another heaven. Two heavens. I mean, pray, ask the Lord to walk you through these scriptures, but I'm reading them and I'm explaining them to see if you can see what I'm saying here. And God said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the firmament in the heaven of the heaven, to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. And let them be for lights in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth. So in this firmament of the heaven, in this heaven of the heaven, okay, so in this first heaven maybe, let them be for lights of the heaven to give light upon the earth. Now these lights that are supposed to give light upon the earth are coming from heaven. And it was so. And God made two great lights. the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. Now, as I was reading this, the Lord was telling me to go to Revelation, because we're at Genesis 16. He's telling me to go to Revelation because doesn't Revelation talk about stars? Because we don't see where angels are created in Genesis necessarily, right? But we know and believe that there are angels in heaven. Angels are talked about. If we've got the story of creation and we've got the story of him creating human beings, we don't have the story of him creating angels. But let me show you something. Take a walk with me over to Revelation. This will be quick because I'm going somewhere with this. And the Lord was showing me that if you read Genesis and Revelation, at least the first chapter concurrently, you begin to have a deeper understanding of Genesis, because they actually reference each other. Now I'm going to go to Revelation chapter 1. It's right in Revelation chapter 1. We don't have to read Revelation, the whole chapter 1, but I'm going to go down to about, I know it's the last verse that defines. Okay, you can read Revelation when you get a chance, but Revelation chapter 1, verse 20 talks about stars. Okay, and it specifically says here, the mystery of the 7 stars, which you saw in my right hand, and the 7 golden candlesticks. The 7 stars are the angels of the 7 churches. And the 7 candlesticks which thou sawest are the 7 churches. Now we go back to Revelation. We just read that these 7 stars are the angels. Angels in Revelation are referenced as stars. Stars. So we go back to Genesis. Oh, yes. Genesis. Right? And where were we? We were at verse 16. So Genesis 1 and 16 says, and God made 2 great lights. I wonder who these great lights were. The greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. These are angels. Get the revelation, pray, and ask the Lord. These are angels that he also made. And God set them, he set them, just as stars are set, in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth, and to rule over the day and over the night, and to divide the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And the evening and the morning were the fourth day. And God said, let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creature that has life. Now he's creating out of the water, he's creating these animals, and fowl that may fly above the earth in the open firmament of heaven. In the open firmament of heaven. So there is the heaven of heaven, the firmament of heaven. And so if these fowl fly above the earth in the open firmament of heaven, don't you see like eagles, birds that fly high up in the sky? He said, let them fly above the earth in the open firmament of heaven. And God created great whales and every living creature that moves, which the waters brought forth abundantly after their kind. All of these animals, whales, and the living creatures that move were created out of water. And every winged fowl after his kind, and God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas, and let fowl multiply on the earth. And the evening and the morning were the 5th day. And God said, let the earth bring forth the living creature after his kind, cattle and creeping thing, and beasts of the earth after his kind. And it was so. God made the beasts of the earth after his kind, and the cattle after their kind, and everything that creepeth upon the earth after his kind, and saw that it was good. So there was no mixed types, no hybrid animals. They were all made after their kind. Verse 26, and God said, let us make man in our image. Now he says our. This entire time, it's saying that God said. God said. He's talking to what's not yet created and telling it to create and let it be, right? Let there be. But here he's saying, let us make man in our image, after our likeness. Our, us, and our. This is a plural. It's like God is talking to someone. Who is he talking to? Let us make man in our image after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. He's saying, let us. Verse 27, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him, male and female created he them. And I find it interesting that this is said like in 3 different ways in this one verse. And I question why? Why do you keep saying this in these 3 different ways? So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. So this is telling me that there were 3 different steps to creating man. Because we know that female was created a little later on. This didn't all happen at one time. And God blessed them. This is verse 28. And God blessed them, and God said unto them, be fruitful and multiply, and replenish the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. And God said, behold, I have given you every herb bearing seed. Now, herb bearing seed, now that's right up my alley with health, herbs, natural healing, right? Behold, I have given you every herb bearing seed, which is upon the face of all the earth, not some, all. So all over the earth, there was herb bearing seed everywhere. Now he's talking about earth. I want to be really clear here. He's telling them to replenish the earth. But I thought that Adam and Eve lived in Eden, which was like in heaven or something, right? And then when they had the fall, they were supposed to be like zapped out of heaven, and then God placed them on earth then, because they had sinned. Earth became their place of living, but they weren't meant to live on earth. I'm just posing a question for like a thought, okay? I'm not stating one thing or the other. I'm just trying to get us to really think about some of the things we might have heard that might have framed our thinking about creation or God or how things work. But I remember hearing these things about Adam and Eve were created, and they were walking through the Garden of Eden, and they lived in Eden. But I've heard things said like, when they were banished out of Eden was like a heavenly place. You can't find it. It's not on earth. But why then would he tell them to replenish the earth and subdue it if they weren't living on earth? If they weren't on earth, why would he tell them to do that? Why would he even create earth and then have these seas and then have the animals come up out of the sea, right? All for like, what's happening here? All right. So he says, be fruitful and multiply, replenish the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea. So these are the ones that came out of that water that was separated when earth was created. And over the fowl of the air, over the fowl of the air that fly up in the firmament of heaven above the earth, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. So they had dominion of the animals in the air. Not even just the ones that moved on earth, They had the earth animals, they had the sea animals, and they had the fowl of the air. They had dominion over all of those things. Rule. How do you rule something that's flying over you? How? Just a question. Genesis 1 and 29. And God said, behold, I have given you every herb bearing seed. Every herb. Not some herbs. Every herb possible. Bearing seed, which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree in the which is the fruit of a tree yielding seed. To you it shall be for meat. Now that means you eat it. So they were eating things. These beings that God created were actually supposed to be eating things. So were Adam and Eve spirits? Were they made human beings prior to the fall? I'm kind of coming after a couple of notions that I've heard, right? Because I've heard that Adam and Eve weren't really people. They were made people once the fall happened. But we know the story of how God formed Adam with his hands. He formed him with his hands. And man became a living soul. So at the point in which he was made with his hands, he became a living soul. That means that he was not just spirit. He was a human being that had flesh, that then was given trees and herb to eat. Verse 30, and to every beast of the earth, and to every fowl of the air, and to everything that creepeth upon the earth, wherein there is life, I have given every green herb for meat. And it was so. So to us, he gave us, I have given you every herb bearing seed, which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree in the which is the fruit of a tree yielding seed. To you it shall be for me. So you have the herbs bearing seed, and you have the trees that bear seed, that bear fruit. Those are the things that we should have been eating. Some would argue that that would mean that these were supposed to be fruitarians, but he did say that he gives every herb bearing seed. I just find it interesting that in verse 30, he makes it very clear to say, I have given every green herb for me, and it was so. He specified the green herbs are for them to eat. So verse 31 says, and God saw that everything that he had made, and he saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And the evening and the morning were the sixth day. Now, just over to chapter 2. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished. He's created both the heaven and the earth. Earth didn't exist. When we got into this chapter, earth didn't even exist. He created that in the beginning. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the hosts of them. All the hosts of them. Do you remember a phrase in the Bible? Heavenly hosts. It says all the hosts of them. That means that the angels were created then as well. I told you, Revelation chapter 1. That last verse in Revelation chapter 1 defines what stars are. And when you flip back to Genesis chapter 1, you understand that the stars were the angels that God created as he was creating everything. And this is chapter 2, verse 2. And on the seventh day, God ended his work which he had made, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had made. And God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because that in it he had rested from all his work which God created and made. So there were a couple of points that I had here that I kind of just walked over because I don't want to move too quickly for some who didn't get some of the revelation I was trying to speak on. Um, but there's a lot in this chapter 1 of Genesis, and I think it may seem rudimentary if we've read Genesis before, but I implore you to go back and read Genesis with an open mind. I pray that God would give you revelation about his creation, because if we can get a foundation about what how he created the earth, how he created us, and really trust the word of God for what it is. When he says he did all, he created all, we should accept that. And if we can begin to accept the truth of the very foundation of God, then we'll be able to accept the truth that we find later on in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and the rest of the New Testament, right? We should be able to accept the truth that we find in Leviticus or Isaiah, right? We should be able to accept the whole truth of God straight out of learning about how he created the heaven and the earth. And when we look at things, we look at it from the spiritual standpoint. In Revelation, he talks about heaven and earth activity back and forth. The same thing happens in Genesis if you're paying attention. He's talking about what he created in the earth, and he created a firmament in the heaven. So right there, I've always wondered, how do people know there was like more than one heaven? Well, a firmament we've already defined through Oxford that the firmament is heaven or sky. And then right here it defines in the Bible that he called the firmament heaven. So if he's saying firmament of the heaven, he's talking about there being a heaven in a heaven. You understand that in our life we have, we're down here, but then there is a spiritual realm. There's a spiritual realm that we cannot see, and there's the heaven that God sits in with his throne, and then there are the heavens in which the enemy and his demons operate in. So there is more than one heaven. Read this prayerfully, read this and understand, and get a foundation if you don't have it on who God is, how he has created our world, and what we deal with. I was taken aback by some news I heard today of two people that had very different walks of life physically, but their deaths seemed to mimic each other. And I'm asking God, how did this happen? As soon as I heard about these deaths, I understood them to be spiritual. The first person I knew of this person, and them being an influencer, not a positive person, but the kinds of things that he said out of his mouth, he should never have said. Wasn't a follower of this person, but I've seen some of his stuff, and never should have said these things. And the way, the tragedy is that when someone passes away, and few people can say publicly anything good about this person, that's the legacy that they leave behind, on top of the shame of how they died as well. No one gets away, right? But in having a foundation and an understanding of the word of God and the principles, and that you shouldn't just, ignore what God says you're supposed to be doing. You shouldn't ignore that. And this is a person who definitely did not follow the principles of God. Now, the other person was proclaimed to be a person of God with a title. And he spoke things out of his mouth that were very much ungodly and not really supposed to be said. And he did this in a public platform, And his last video is one of him dragging someone who asked him a question. And I mean drag. Um, but he called himself a prophet. Don't don't you know as a prophet there's some things you don't say? Like your mouth is one of the most important parts of your body now. So you're careful in how you use it. This is how God ministers to people. And you're using this mouth to spew garbage. And you're also using this same mouth to tell people about what the word of God says. I didn't follow this person either. So I don't have the in-depth uh, relationship. But just looking at the two, it's interesting as to how one person can be proclaimed prophet who uses their mouth to prophesy, and the other person not proclaimed a prophet. But how do we know that wasn't his call? Because he definitely prophesied negativity on a whole host of females. He used his mouth for dirt. Both of them did it. And both of them just surprisingly ended up dead on the same day. But both of them used their mouth to spew garbage. So I was bothered by this and I was trying to think of how I could come on here and like, I don't know, give my 2 cents. I was really, really bothered by like hurt at the fact that this is like glaring. God, I always call it chickens come home to roost. You know, this is like an example. And if you miss the example, shame on you. God does not like some of the things that are going on in the world and in the church. And he will make an example of you if you continue to knowingly do wrong. You will not get away with it, and you will not have a legacy that follows your great name. All of it will be torn down in a moment because you chose not to follow what God was instructing you. Now, both of these men had opportunity to know God on a real level. One of them supposedly did. And this isn't talking about anybody, but this is just an FYI. One thing I know is you cannot play. God is not slack concerning his promise. He will deliver everything he said that he's going to do. And if he said he's going to come and he's going to bring his wrath, he will. But he is patient toward us. That kind of patience is like, okay, they're getting away with it. They're getting away with it right now. But I'm gonna come. I'm gonna give them a chance because he doesn't want anyone to perish. But the fact that he would allow such ones to perish should warn us and tell us that he has had enough. And it doesn't matter if you call his name. It doesn't matter how many people you bless with a word or two from the Lord. When you are actively taking their money to coat your pockets. And so many people are out there doing this in the name of the Lord. I question every time I post a video, I question my motives for the things that I do because being on a public stage or eventually being on a public stage where many people are watching my video, I do not want to have done the wrong thing or said the wrong thing in the presence of God and did it and said God said and God didn't say any of those things. This is a season where people need to watch their mouths. This is a season where people need to keep their mouths closed and be very careful what they say to other people and how they treat other people. Because God is not mocked. And I just keep hearing that. He's not mocked and he's not slow. He's not slack concerning his promise. He is going to do everything that he said he's going to do. And individually, we need to have accountability to what we're putting out there, how we're being an example to other people. This prophet could have done something differently with a lot of the words that I've seen him use. Instead of praying or giving scripture, he bashed and dragged people because he didn't like certain things that they did. Somebody that said something negative to him in the comments, instead of taking that opportunity to call out that person's name in prayer or say, you know what, this is how we do this. We don't retaliate. We ask God to help that person, to draw him closer. Instead of praying, he dragged this lady. And now that's the last video of him that anybody will ever see. The last video of him will be, and that's where people are going to go, what was the last thing he did? And they're going to see this distasteful display of what a prophet. You can't call yourself a prophet and act outside of that and not be accountable. And the accountability is higher for someone who knows God than for the one who doesn't know God at all. Like, you really done it now. You should know better. And for this person to die just a day after that happened, it's just too close. People need to recognize what season it is. It's the season to keep your mouth closed. So when people are doing things to you, you don't go against them and say negative things about them, because God is watching. And you don't know if those negative things are going to kill your blessing that God has coming for you. The enemy is setting you up. He is setting you up to make the wrong choices at exactly the right moment that could take your blessing away. He can't take anything from you unless you give it away. And how you do it a lot of times is how you treat people and your mouth, the things that you say. So we have to be careful the things that we say out of our mouth, because just as God spoke out of his mouth and created the earth in 7 days, 6 days, and then rested on the seventh, the same way do we create things out of our mouth. And just because we don't see the things all the time doesn't mean that these things aren't going to become seeds that grow or be tangible, that somebody else can feel. He talked about this lady so bad and put her name out there and everything. Thousands of people have watched this video and know this lady's Facebook and know her name. Now, these people could go to her and start just hitting her up with all kinds of negative and nasty comments. I just don't believe that God is a God like that. I just don't. And the things that he said, it was terrible. He doesn't deserve, I don't know what he deserves, but I'll say it's still tragic that he has died just a day after posting such. He seems so much full of life. And the tragedy of it is, like, he died in a really, it's a terrible way that he died. He was killed. It's terrible. At the end of the day, we need to be watchful. I don't want to belabor the point and be on here way too long, so I'm going to go. Genesis 1, creation, what we create with our mouths is important. We need to know that what we say out of our mouth can create a life or a death situation. God shows us in Genesis 1 that he created everything with his mouth, with his words. So we should understand that our words are powerful. The Bible tells us that we speak things that are not as though they were. We speak things into existence, just like he did. And that's probably why we can go back to this scripture here that says, in his image, God created man in his image. In his image. So anyway, thank you for joining me for this Bible study. Let me know what you think of some of these parts in Genesis. Let me know if you've seen these things before, if it made sense, if it didn't make sense, and we can do more Bible studies like this. I just thought it was really interesting, and I felt like sharing since I was going over it anyway. And I just gave my 2 cents about some happenings today and yesterday. But if you like this video, thought it was helpful, like, subscribe, all of that stuff. And I will see you in the next video.